Hello and welcome to this show of the Author Spotlight. Like every other time, I've got a fantastic author that's joining us today, and I'm very intrigued to find out about her book because it's something that's close to my heart as well. But she's going to be sharing with us the highs, the lows, and the lessons of things that she'd wish she'd learned before she wrote the book. So without any further ado, please welcome the wonderful Helen Rowe.
Hello.
So welcome, Helen. Thank you for joining us. So let's just start, first of all, a bit about you and about your book.
So the book is called Eliminating Poverty in Britain. It's how we can go about doing it in 5 years without raising taxes. It is a deep dive into the effects of poverty on society, on the human body, because there's now a lot of biological information about what poverty does to the human body and the human brain. And then it talks about a plan of how we actually go about dealing with it in Britain. The reason it's 5 years is because that's a single government term. We've got no guarantee of re-election, and without raising taxes, because you can't get elected into government in Britain if you say you're going to raise them. So if you genuinely want to end poverty, then you have to find a new way of doing it within those kind of constraints, and that's fine. And that's just what we need to do. There's no point in saying it's too hard. It is absolutely vital now. If we want to get our society and our country and our economy on the move again. So I feel this is really timely. It's been timely for years, to be honest. It's, it could have come out at any point, really. From my own personal background, I was a civil servant for 9 years at the Foreign Office, which is probably why I found the idea of looking at central government easier, because I've kind of been there. And then I spent some time working in a housing association, and we were dealing with the effects of the bedroom tax. And then I became a mum, and I just looked at our society and felt that it just wasn't good enough. It isn't good enough, not for my child or anybody's child. And so I thought, well, I can either just be angry and moan a bit, and or I can try writing. And so I just sort of gave it a shot, really.
And it's not a small task, though, is it, to get rid of poverty in eliminating it, and in 5 years, and within those criteria without taxes. So I have to ask, it's not even on the sheet where I said I was going to ask you these questions, but where did the plan come from?
It was a slow burn, I have to say. It was just very staying with the topic for years. I mean, I had the idea for the book 10 years ago. And then obviously I had my daughter and life got in the way and the pandemic got in the way. But all the time I was kind of researching little ideas and thinking about them and bouncing ideas off friends and what's possible and what's not. And also looking at the history of things like the idea of the undeserving poor. And, it's a Victorian notion that still exists in today's society. But actually, when you look at who perpetuates that idea, it tends to be politicians, not all politicians, but it's a very useful narrative for a politician to say, oh, it can't be done, and people's poverty is entirely due to their own issues, because then they don't have to do very much. How can you as a politician possibly be expected to deal with that? And I think we've got used to alleviating poverty in Britain, managing it, doing a bit of support and then expecting people to get on with it. But when you look deep down at what the massive barriers are in our society, it shows that actually this is not a meritocracy. This idea that anybody can be anything and do anything is a nonsense. And the idea that people who are successful, become millionaires or just own their own very successful businesses, are in some way inherently have earned that on a level playing field with everybody else who hasn't got it is not true the vast majority of the time. And so to turn around and say, well, some people have got it out of merit and others are just lazy is a nonsense. And it's an excuse for politicians not to do that much. And for and I think they are, and when I say politicians, obviously that's a large group of people, some politicians, but we've had 13 years of Tory government, and it's not, poverty is rising, and that's not acceptable to me. And I think that it's time.
And I guess even if it's their narrative as a politician, don't talk over there, like that sort of narrative of the politician, it then influences the general public. And if we don't know better, we generally believe what we're told. If we're so it's. I'm going to have a word with Karen, because I'm discovering doing these interviews for her. I've got a lot of books to read now afterwards. I'm having to, it's only a half an hour interview, but then I have to have 2 or 3 hours to go and grab these books and read them. So you have really piqued my interest.
Great.
And it's a conversation I've had time and time again with lots of different people. Another author that works with Karen, Helen Monahan. And there's definitely some people I'll be recommending the book to as well, because I know they'll be interested. So this journey, then, you talked briefly there that you've been thinking about this thing for 10 years, and you've been researching and testing out things with friends, and becoming a mum, life gets in the way. So you've been thinking about it for 10 years, but going from that sort of thinking about it and then becoming a published author, that for you has been like what?
Oh, huge. It's been a hell of a learning curve, I have to say. It really, writing a book is just a stab in the dark in a lot of ways. You are just kind of doing it with passion and hope that it will get published. And actually Karen chose my book to win the Page Turner Awards Mentorship Prize, and she gave me the mentorship. And it's one of those things where I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know I needed a book mentor until she sat me down and said, this is what you need to do. And this is the audience. You need to think about your audience, think about the business side of the book, which was completely alien to me as a civil servant. And, working in the charity sector. I didn't have a clue. So it was so beneficial to have a book mentor. And I would definitely recommend it to any new author. That also the structure of the book is very different to writing a paper or an essay or an exam or a dissertation. It's a very different thing. And thank goodness she was there, frankly, because what happened was then she pushed me to go to the London Book Fair, to go and talk to publishing houses, but with the book in a really good state. And that was huge. It was a massive turning point, that winning that mentorship.
So when it was a massive turning point, we often, Karen and I, use the metaphor of it's being an author is a bit like being on a journey. But what would your metaphor be from that moment that you decided to write, and then winning the mentorship, and then going and getting yourself a publisher, and then becoming a published author? If you had a metaphor for that, that would be like what?
Oh, blimey. It's just an immense learning curve. I think you have to be. My grandfather said, if you want something hard enough, you'll find a way of getting it. And it's not entirely true, because, I'm never going to beat Usain Bolt at 100 meters. There are certain things that you work hard at, it's just not going to happen. But if you keep it to like reality, actually, that's true for me. That's what I found, was that how much do I genuinely want this? How much am I prepared to go out of my comfort zone in order to get this? And I think that's what's pushed me through the whole way, is that thing of thinking, how much do you genuinely want this? And I think it's also being a mum as well, that idea of like, you're prepared to do an awful lot for children. And that also pushed me forward to do it.
I remember the point when I got stuck on my book, that was the big driver. All the business stuff that I'd gone through with Karen, and I kind of knew why I was doing it, and I wanted to make a difference to the world. But really, the crux of it was I wanted to leave a guide or a manual back for my children. So I think it's a really, really important thing, isn't it? Karen talks about knowing your why. And I think why would your client, your audience, want to read the book is one why. But why do you want to write the book? And that might be aligned completely, that you have those people in your mind that you're writing to that really matters. But when you can bring it right back to your own personal life, whether it's your own sense of satisfaction, a sense of achievement, or children, it can be a real driver, because as you say, you have to do, there are some uncomfortable parts of the process where you have to push yourself through.
Really uncomfortable, yeah.
And I think you've kind of touched on it, but I just want to ask the question in case there's anything else. So why did you write this book? So if you've known you've always wanted to write a book and you've been sort of researching it, why this one, this sort of, and why now, the Eliminating Poverty in Britain?
It's a lot of it was deep frustration at the state of our society. Even before I had my daughter, it was working in the housing association, and we were having conversations which were, in my view, crazy. We were having conversations about how to house people and where to house them and when. And I thought, if we had enough social homes, this wouldn't be an issue. We shouldn't be having to have this conversation. And everything at the time, socially, it was right in the middle of deep austerity. Everything felt like it was falling apart within our country. And we were right on the crux of, starting into the Brexit mess. I mean, whether you voted for it or against it, it's been a mess. And so I think I just felt like I wanted to get a grip, and I had all these ideas and all this stuff constantly going around in my head. And I just thought, I just need to get it out, otherwise it was just, and I do love writing. I have to say, I find it very easy. And I get to the end of the day, if I've spent like a really productive day and I've reread what I've done and re-edited it and edited it again, but I just love it. I get a real sense of achievement and satisfaction from that. So there's the combination of the two, really.
So loving writing and the deep frustration with society and the things that are going on.
That's essentially it. And then it just got worse once I became a mum.
And have you always loved writing?
Yes, although actually it's only just occurred to me after finishing the book. I was like, oh, I really like doing this. Because when I was at the Foreign Office, I was writing papers for the government. And it's always kind of, and I've always written a diary, sort of on and off, but generally speaking, it's a way of getting stuff out of my head. And it's a way of making kind of a sense in the world and peace and so on. So it has been, it is a labour of love as much as anything else as well.
Fabulous. So what's been the most important thing that you've learned as a result of writing this book?
I think it's been the business side of it, actually. You can have all the creativity and all the love of writing, but if you can't get it in front of people, then that's a real problem. And then afterwards, once I'd signed the contract with Flint Books, there are 143 quotes in the book, because what I didn't want it was to just be my understanding of the world. All those people, I mean, I did interview a few people for the book, but there's a whole host of other wisdom in it, I guess. But each one of those quotes required permission to use it. And I spent 6 months just getting permission to quote and deciding whether to pay for quotes or not pay for quotes, and was it valid and who was responsible, and all of that side, making sure that the checks were right so that it was a proper, formal, substantive book. And I wasn't expecting that at all. So if I write another one, I'm going to be very aware next time of what I put in it and how many I do.
Yeah. And I guess it comes back down to, though, isn't it? Because I remember having a quote in mind and I was so surprised how I only had the one to go reference off, but they were really helpful, and they actually rewrote the chapter for me and gave me more stuff and said, yeah, you can, but you have to put this in, so you haven't got the whole thing. You've only got a part of it. So we've rewritten it, and if you can take this in its entirety, you can do it. Thank you very much. So I think there's two sides to it. I think sometimes it's, particularly for those watching this views, it can feel daunting. It can put people off doing it. But if you've got 143 quotes and it's only taken you 6 months to go through it, in some respects, that kind of shows it's possible and you can do it. And I think it's very easy. People start to because the fear of having to ask for permission stops people from either writing it, or they start editing that part and then they lose the essence of the book, because actually it's a foundation of their own beliefs. It's something they've learned from those people. So hat off to you for doing 143 of them.
Thank you. It was quite a slog.
I am impressed. I am very impressed, and I will remember to come to you for inspiration if I've ever got to do that many in many of my books.
Thank you.
What do you wish you'd known before you started?
Other than the permission to quote system. Gosh, I mean, it's been such a learning curve. I think, gosh, it would have been good to know how long it was going to take. I think it took much, much longer than I was expecting. And to have to be patient with it as well, you know, and it is, you do need grit and determination to keep going when you are getting all of those rejection letters, you know, and I did get some. It wasn't just a kind of walk through the door. And I think the thing, I mean, I don't have an agent. That's the thing. And I went, you know, I have a direct relationship with the publishers, and lots of people think, oh, you have to have an agent to do it. And it's not 100% necessary. And actually, when I did get in front of agents, they often didn't know what to do with the book, because it's partially scientific and fact, it's partially autobiography, it's partially quotes, and you know, it's a whole wealth of information. And they didn't know who to sell it to and who to try. And if I had thought at that stage, oh, well, if they can't do it, then it can't be done, it wouldn't be here. So there is that element of genuine kind of, you've got to have that belief to keep going. And I think you were right from what you were saying earlier on about, that's when you think about the people you're doing it for and why you're doing it, because that's what keeps you going when you're getting those rejection letters. Yeah.
So there's a lot to learn, and what you've known before is that it's also that, so there's a grit and determination, but I think you've mentioned already having a mentor has helped, because obviously there's things you didn't know you needed to know.
Yeah.
And that actually, just because an agency says they can't, I'm interpreting, I'm paraphrasing, that it's like they couldn't put it into a genre or a box. So therefore they don't know how to do their sales pitch to the publishers.
Yeah.
Whereas you've gone in personally, it sounds like, from places like the London Fair and actually, or Book Fair, and actually be able to make that work. So I guess there's so much, I've got so many questions. You can hear my brain ticking, how you're like, well, I could go off script, and I'm trying to remind myself what I'm supposed to be asking. So what was your lowest point in the book writing journey?
I think it was getting that rejection from the agent and thinking, have I wasted my time? Is this actually not possible? Because I think one of the things they struggled with as well is the fact that I'm not famous and I don't have a PhD, and therefore why should someone listen to me? You know, I'm well trained at analysis, good writer, well trained at writing. You know, I've had all the training that you could want, but I think they do like putting either famous people or PhD. You know, this professor has written this book, not a stay-at-home mum. And I think that, that was a bit like, but then it also was fuel for the fire as well, because I was like, no, this is nonsense. That doesn't mean, just because I'm not a PhD doesn't mean that my work isn't valuable. So I took a bit of a hit, but then I was like, no, I'm going to keep going, because also it's about, like you said, the why, and the keeping your focus as to why you're doing this, and that kind of sense of, I'm not living in poverty, so what right do I have to turn around and say, oh, it's all too hard?
Absolutely. And I remember the questions, because you said, you know, you wish you'd known how long it was going to take. So how long did it take you, and how long did you think it was going to take you?
I thought it'd take about 2 years, and it took, all in all, it took 10. Admittedly, there were babies and so on in between time in the pandemic, where everything stopped. But it was, I mean, from the writing, so I did about 6 years of research, sort of little bit by little bit, and our house was covered in post-it notes of ideas and quotes and things like that. But then sitting down and actually writing and doing the work was about 3 years.
And at what point did you meet Karen?
That was after, so the book wasn't yet finished. So it was the Mentorship Prize didn't need a finished book. It just needed enough substance. So that would have been after the first, I think after the first year, roughly, of writing it. Then, because I had to put, it was about 6 months from putting the application in for the award to actually receiving it.
Right.
And if you want a laugh, go on the Page Turner Awards Mentorship Prize acceptance speech, because I do slightly lose my mind. I could not believe it when she said it was me. There's no decorum in that one at all. But yeah, it was about a year. So it was good timing as well, because I was ready for it.
Get Karen to find it and put it in the show notes for everybody. Perhaps I'll get you to email it to me afterwards. So given all that, that's your lowest, was the agency being rejected, obviously taking longer and having to have the grit and determination to keep going. And fortunately, you've got your children that says, you can't afford to just let this go when you know you've got an idea that could change things for people. What's been your biggest success to date?
Oh, getting the Mentorship Prize and the publishing deal. I mean, those are the two things that have changed everything, really. Without either of those, this wouldn't be happening. And it was quite a thing to get that phone call to say, yeah, we are going to take your book on, and yeah, it and also to, like I say, to receive Karen's award, because it was the first time anyone had actually read it, was when Karen read it. And so to have someone say, yes, this is valuable, and yes, this is worth publishing and worth working on, was a huge push forward. I mean, talk about morale boost. It was everything at the time, really.
Yeah.
Because it is such a leap in the dark.
Yeah, well, hat off to you though for having the faith and the confidence and the courage, whatever that was needed, in order to put it in and submit it for that kind of competition and the awards in the first place. Because I know that many of the authors we work with, especially when we're on the retreats, they'll be writing pieces and then we'll read a little bit and give feedback on it. And actually, it's a very vulnerable point, because in your head, when we write, maybe it's just me, you write it and it like sounds really great, and you tell a few friends and they go, oh, that's really amazing, you need to do that. And then somebody else reads it. It's a really horrible sensation of feeling like, what if I've just made it all up? But it's great. And then somebody else reads it. So I can totally get with that bit when someone else reads it and goes, oh my God, that's really useful, or that's really insightful, or that makes a massive difference. Fantastic. So without any further ado, I do want to just put we had someone live, that's why I was a bit distracted then. So I was just seeing if they left any questions. So if you do want to find out about Helen's book, you can go to her website, helenroweuk.net. And on the homepage, you will find a link to her book, which, just to remind you again, is called Eliminating Poverty in Britain by Helen Rowe. So I just want to ask you, really, just to finish the interview today, really about this, the bit about the publishing deals, because a lot of people nowadays, particularly people that Karen and I've worked with, go down the self-publishing route. So tell us a little bit about getting published and actually having a publishing deal. What was the process? That was like what? Any hints or tips that you'd have for anybody else who's going to go down that route? Because it's not something that all of our authors do. And it'd be lovely to get a bit more information before we love and leave you today.
To be honest, I think a lot of it is luck, to be honest. The reason I met people from Flint was because I went to a book launch of a friend of mine who had who was publishing with the History Press. And I met his publicist, and he said, oh, we have a sister company that's just set up, and and I'll pass your details on. I think having won the award definitely helped to get people to take the work seriously, particularly given I'm not a famous author or a famous person, to actually sort of say, it's not even out yet, and yet it's won a prize. That really helps. So I would recommend people get your the Page Turner Awards was really useful, actually. It's not that well known yet. It's only been going a few years. I think it was the second or third year they'd done it when I won. But it was really useful to be able to get that stepping stone. And then once I had a first kind of initial meeting with Laura Perenek, who's the chief executive of Flint and the History Press, and I met her at the London Book Fair. And I think the other thing I would say is you do need to turn up. You can't do everything by email. Actually going and pressing the flesh and meeting people in the flesh is hugely important. And it's hard when you're a writer because you just want to be in your room typing away, doing your research. Yeah. And so getting yourself out there, I have found that hard as well, but it's necessary. And people want to be able to see the light in your eyes when you talk about the book.
So when you found it hard, what's helped you to get out there? Is it still that sort of thinking about your children and knowing that you just have to do it, or is there something else?
Lots of deep breaths, really. just take a deep breath. There's a quote by Eleanor Roosevelt says, feel the fear and do it anyway. And that helped as well. Yeah. And so all those I have a whole wall in my office of like quotes and people's ideas and, stuff to kind of get you out there and keep you going. So a lot of it's just self-motivational push, really.
So self-motivational.
Yeah.
So that's probably a good place to leave it. So those of you that are on live, if you've got any questions, please pop them below the group in the video in the Facebook group. Those watching it now on YouTube or via Karen's channels, please get in touch. But thank you so much, Helen, for joining us today. And I look forward to finding out more about what happens on your journey as an author now.
Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. So that brings us to the close of today's show. If you've got any questions for Helen Rowe, and particularly if you're interested in getting her book, then obviously just go rewind the video and get the link, and do go and get that book, because I've got a feeling it's something we're all going to have to help with. This is not just a government problem and we're going to have to muck in. But if you are like Helen and you have been wanting to write a book, then don't forget that our sponsor, Librotas, which is also Karen Williams, is here to help you. So if you didn't even know Book Mentors existed, please get in touch with myself or Karen, and we will be more than happy to read your book, as Helen suggested, and give you some pointers and next steps. And if we can be of any help as a company to help you on your journey, we'd love to hear from you. Have a great day, and look forward to hearing about you and your books in the future.